Let's take a look at the 4 types of sentence structures. The first type of sentence structure is simple. In a simple sentence structure, you have one independent clause, and that's it. So our first one, he ate the pie, has a subject, he, and a verb, ate, and that's it. So it means that we have a single clause. That makes it a simple sentence. Look at the next sentence though. It doesn't look simple. It's got a lot of description in it, and it's fairly long. This, though, still has the man from California devouring a whole pie in one sitting. So we still have a single subject and a single verb working together, which means that this is one independent clause, and it's a simple sentence. The last one is just a reminder that it's okay to have compound subjects and compound verbs in an independent clause. So, for instance, he ate the pie and took a nap has the subject he, and he is doing 2 things. He's eating and he's taking a nap. So, we have one subject doing 2 actions. That still counts as a single subject-verb pair. In order to have 2 here, we'd need a second subject for took instead of referring back to the previous ones. So this is still a simple sentence. When we get to our next type, we aren't changing a lot. In a compound sentence structure, all you're doing is taking 2 simple ones and putting them together. In other words, you have 2 independent clauses and you're joining them with something that we call a coordinating conjunction. Now, coordinating conjunctions are just conjunctions that combine 2 sentences. And all of the conjunctions in the English language that function as coordinating can be summarized using the acronym FANBOYS. FANBOY stands for and, nor, but, or, yet, and so. We also can use this in place, the semicolon, in place of a coordinating conjunction. So I put it after the FANBOYS just to remind myself that it can serve a similar role. There's one other grammar rule with compound sentences. In order to keep compound sentences straight, we use a comma before the conjunction. So right after the last word before the conjunction. And we're going to add some commas here below, looking at these compound sentences. The stars shone and the moon glimmered. Here we have stars shone, moon glimmered, so I know I have 2 subject-verb combinations. That leaves us with one independent clause, the stars shone, and a second independent clause, the moon glimmered, and they're joined by and, one of our FANBOYS. So what I'll do is I will add a comma after the word shone, and I should be good to go. With our second one, she decided to eat the warm sushi. It was not a good choice. Here we have she decided, and it was as our subject-verb combinations. And once more, that means that since both of these are independent, right, these could stand as their own sentences, this must be a compound sentence. In this case, since we're using a semicolon, we don't need to add a comma. A semicolon actually includes a comma already in it. Last but not least, she ducked. Oh, that's a subject-verb combination. He dodged. That's a second one. But it was too late. It was. That's another subject-verb. So here we have 3 clauses, but all 3 of these clauses are independent. They could stand on their own. And they're joined with these coordinating conjunctions, and but. So that means that this is still a compound sentence. You can have more than 2 independent clauses. I just need to make sure that there are commas before each of the coordinating conjunctions. There is one after ducked, which is perfect, but there's one missing after dodged, so I'll add that in. Our third sentence structure is called complex. In a complex sentence structure, you have one independent clause and one or more dependent clauses. Don't forget our rule from earlier. Use a comma if your dependent clause comes first. Looking at these ones, then, let's identify the dependent and independent clauses. I'll use brackets around the dependent clauses, and I'll underline the independent. As the sun rose over the valley, the people were filled with hope. Here I have sun rose as one of my subjects and verbs, and people were filled as the second one. So let's split this into those 2 parts. The sun rose where? Over the valleys. That means all of this goes into one clause. The people were filled with hope is an independent clause, so I have it split into two pieces here. Now, I've started with a dependent clause, so I will have to add a comma after the word valley. Let's check the next one. Never had they felt so glad after the long night ended. Well, I can see I have they felt, or they had felt, as one, and night ended as our second. I can see that glad is describing felt, so all of this goes with that first one, which can stand on its own. Never had they felt so glad is its own sentence. But after the long night ended is a dependent clause because it couldn't be used as its own sentence. Since I started with an independent and followed it with a dependent, I don't need a comma. Last but not least, the children cheered as the snow fell because they had never seen anything so beautiful. The children cheered is an independent clause. As the snow fell is dependent, and because they had never seen anything so beautiful is also dependent. For our final type, we're looking at what's called a compound complex. So sometimes you want more than one independent clause, which would make it compound. But you also want at least one or more dependent clauses, which would make it complex. So we just combine them together and call it a compound complex. The previous rules for commas will still apply, so you still need them before coordinating conjunctions, and you still need them when the dependent clause comes first. Let's check these sentences. If you ever run into a dragon, remain very still, and it might not see you. I can see that I have a subject, you, and run in that first part. I can also see that remain is another verb, and here remain is being used as a command, which means it has an understood you in front of it. Last but not least, I have an it might see. So I should have three clauses. If you ever run into a dragon is dependent thanks to the word if, our subordinating conjunction. Remain very still could be its own sentence, and it's a command. That is then an independent. And it might not see you is another independent. Since I started with a dependent, I will need a comma after dragon, and since I have a coordinating conjunction, I'll need a comma after still. The footsteps sounded loudly, and their echoes reverberated through the alley as she hid behind the trash cans. Here I have footsteps sounded loudly. That is my first independent clause. Their echoes reverberated through the alley is a second independent clause because echoes reverberated. And as she hid behind the trash can is our first dependent clause. I'll need a comma after loudly because I have two independent clauses joined by that coordinating conjunction, but I don't technically need one here. Upon occasion, you will see one here if they're doing a contrast between the two statements. Last but not least, the moon never shines and the stars never glow because in a world without hope there is no light. Well, this is terribly depressing, but it is a beautiful compound complex statement. Moon shines is our first one, and this is independent because you could say the moon never shines and it works. I have a coordinating conjunction, so I'm just going to put a comma right away here. The stars never glow, so stars glow, that's our second one. In a world without hope, well, this doesn't have a verb yet. There's no verb yet, but I do have there is. So that means that I do have a subject verb here. This should be a separate clause. And a world without hope is describing where there is no light, so that all is part of this clause. And it is dependent thanks to the word because. Again, I don't necessarily need this comma here because there isn't a contrast. And that is the end of our sentences. Using what we know about compound complex and compound complex as well as simple, you can actually identify each of these. As always, start by identifying your clauses and deciding if they're dependent or independent. Then make sure that you have any commas that might be missing because it's really easy to miss commas in the English language. And last but not least, take a look at how many dependent versus independent you have to label each of these. Keep in mind that simple sentences are okay, and there will be several in here.